Some of you may become somewhat uncomfortable as parts of this film unfold, but I think if you listen carefully...
Nature has intended that you bound to be a supreme
A healthy, happy sex life is a most wonderful and exciting. We've all experienced curiosity about ourselves and the opposite sex. Who hasn't?
Hello, lovelies. I'm Megan.
I'm Marcella.
And I'm Colin.
I'm Krista, and welcome to Remedial Sex Ed.
Yay!
So last week, or last episode, I guess, we released about The Ethical Slut. It was our book report. And this week, we have a very, what's the word I want to use? Like, experienced, knowledgeable guru on polyamory joining us today. We have Krista Niederjohn, the founder of Amourology.
Hello.
Welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah. I think all of us are curious. Every polyamory takes different shapes for absolutely everybody. So I'd love to know, could you tell us a little bit about your background? Like when did you join this lifestyle? Like, how have you always had leanings towards this kind of romantic relationship? Yeah, can you give us a little background on you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have identified as polyamorous for about a decade now. And I have one of those people that have kind of always had polyamorous tendencies and just didn't know what it was. I didn't know that it was okay or how to go about that. So when I met someone who had been polyamorous, I asked a lot of questions and I went to a lot of meetings and kind of did a ton of research. And then as my personality does, I dove headfirst in and kind of felt this weight lifted off of my shoulders. And it was just, I don't know, it was free and easy and felt very natural, and have never gone back.
That's awesome. So the first person that you met, was that a partner that taught you about the lifestyle, or was it a friend?
Yeah, it was someone who ended up becoming a partner. Okay. We dated for about 2 years, and then things kind of ended in flames, as they do sometimes. Yeah. But not because of polyamory, because he was a terrible person. But
yeah, I've met those people.
Yeah, I don't meet very many. Usually, if I have relationships end, it's usually pretty quiet and
amicable.
It's amicable, yeah. This one was not.
Even asking the question, I wasn't entirely sure how to phrase when did you become polyamorous? Because that's not really the thing. It's just, when did you learn that it was an acceptable lifestyle is, I guess, the right way to phrase it. Because I've got to say, I've always been very curious. I think that I kind of lean that way, but I've never really educated myself on it. I read The Ethical Slut, and we'd love to get your take. I know you've read it as well.
Yeah, so we were talking about it a little bit earlier, but I feel like The Ethical Slut is a good book for people kind of coming into their sexuality a little bit, or coming into polyamory, just to kind of get an idea of what is possible, what's out there. A lot of people use the book as kind of a how-to on polyamory, and it's not really meant for that. It's not really a guide on polyamory. It's more of a snapshot of one person's experience within the realm of ethical non-monogamy. So it can be a good book. I would just caution readers to not take it right at face value and try to emulate it, I guess.
So how would you say would be a guide to polyamory? Because I think the book promotes itself as a guide to polyamory.
It does, yeah. And I guess that's my critique of it, is that I don't think that it is. But there are guides out there. There's More Than Two, which is kind of an actual written guide. And there are things like the Polyamorous Next Door, or there's tons of podcasts out there if you're interested in that type of stuff too, which I assume your readers are, since this is a podcast. But there's so many podcasts out there that delve into kind of either the 201 or the 101, depending on where your level's at.
Which one's your favorite?
Oh gosh, as far as podcasts go, I like Multiamory a lot. I don't know if you guys know who they are. Yeah, they so they are more of like not quite a 101 polyamory podcast, but they do delve a lot into kind of the deeper issues that go along with even just relationships, not necessarily polyamory, but just relationships with people and with friends and all that stuff. But they do deal a lot with polyamory as well.
Cool. That's one of the things we really liked about the Ethical Slut was how much it dealt with just some good communication guides talking about owning your feelings and sometimes embracing conflict rather than trying to avoid it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about like different shapes of polyamory that you've experienced?
Yeah. So there's so many different ways to practice polyamory. I oftentimes will more align myself with what's called relationship anarchy. And it's just kind of this idea that instead of adhering to the prescribed notions of what relationships are supposed to look like, you instead make the relationships work for you, however that works for every person involved. I currently live in a polyamorous household. I live with 5 adults and 2 children. Who are the adults are all kind of intertwined a little bit in their romantic and sexual relationships. That is a model frequently called like kitchen table polyamory, meaning the idea that like all of your partners in metamors, so metamors being your partners, can all kind of sit down at the kitchen table and have a meal together and everything's fine.
Nice.
But there are other forms of polyamory too. There's like solo polyamory, or there's like closed groups or triads, or, all sorts of different forms that it can take on.
What's solo polyamory?
So solo polyamory is generally described as people who want to share romantic, committed relationships with other people, but they don't necessarily want to live with someone else. So they kind of just live on their own. They do their own thing. They hold a lot of that autonomy, but they still want to have committed relationships.
Cool.
Gotcha.
I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about relationship anarchy. Just a clarifying point. Is that like opposed to hierarchical polyamorous relationships where you have a primary and then like secondaries and tertiary relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think that hierarchical polyamory is tough because I feel like it's really, really hard to actually make it ethical. It's really hard to do it well and account for all of the empowerment of all of and the autonomy of all the people involved. Because just by nature of it, you have somebody, if you call them your primary, you have somebody who is never going to be as good as that, and they don't get a say in that. You're describing that for them. Now, I would also say that my relationships have naturally fallen into a hierarchy. So I don't say that I practice hierarchical polyamory, but just by nature of how long I've been with partners, things that we've gone through together. I mean, I have one partner that I've been with for 8 years, and they're naturally going to be higher on that hierarchy than someone that I've dated for 6 months.
Sure.
Okay.
So, but there's not this expectation that they get a say in this other person's life and our relationship, if that makes sense. Relationship anarchy is kind of, I wouldn't really say it's the opposite, because I think you could almost actually do hierarchical polyamory within the confines of relationship anarchy if you were making it so that those relationships were working for you and not the other way around. But relationship anarchy it rejects the idea of preconceived notions of relationships and what those should look like.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
I think Colin just got excited at the word anarchy and was like,
did.
"Must know everything."
In my language.
So how did you meet the people in this household? I think that's something that I've been super fascinated is like, how do you form a community? Like what were some steps that you took? What would you suggest to new people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel very fortunate in that Utah actually has a huge polyamorous community, and one that I've helped cultivate for a long time. When I first came into the community, there were monthly meetups, and they were very small. They were like, I don't know, six to 10 people at a time. Now we have 7 monthly events, and we have hundreds of people that come to them and stuff like that. But it's a great place to meet people at those events.
That is wild.
So one of my current partners, the one that I've been with for about 8 years, he was actually best friends with the person that got me into polyamory. So that's how we got introduced. My other partner, gosh, this is all complicated. I'm going to use names because it's okay if they told me I can use names. So Ford is the relationship that I've been with for 8 years. Ford started dating Terry actually before he and I started dating. So they've known each other for longer. Terry is married to Grant, who I have been dating for about 5 years.
Okay.
And then Terry is also dating Chris, who lives with us, and they've been together for, gosh, almost 12 years now. They've been in it for a while. So we just ended up meeting them kind of through this small community, what was a small community at the time. You kind of just got to know people. But there are communities all over the country. So if people are new looking into polyamory, I highly recommend just Googling polyamory in your area and finding meetups and finding something to do, because that's gonna be the easiest way to find your people.
Okay.
Do you guys ever meet at the Murray Library?
We have before.
Colin's mom is a librarian there.
Oh, yeah.
And she, every time we've talked about this like episode or while we were reading The Ethical Slut, that was like her little tidbit to throw out.
Yeah, she brought it up like there's a meetup that meets at the library.
That's hilarious. Yeah, that's so funny. I think they've gone back to the Salt Lake Library, but we did meet at the Murray Library for a while there. So
it's a nice little library.
It is.
I'm interested. I'm fascinated that there is such a big community in Utah, being such a it's not a culture that's comfortable with sex and sexuality.
It is a culture that has roots in polygamy.
Exactly where I'm going with
that's
this.
Kind of a unique relationship.
So, yeah, Megan, this was your question, and I think it was like a really interesting question. Do you want to take it from here?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, being based in Utah, I guess I have a 2-part question.
Mm-hmm.
Utah is very traditional. It's very conservative.
Yes.
How difficult is it to live as someone who is out as polyamorous in Salt Lake City?
So it can be difficult. There are a lot of people that are not out to friends, family, coworkers, that sort of stuff. It actually, to me, is kind of fascinating, but because there's such a prominent LDS religion in Utah, the countercultures have kind of had to band together against this common enemy. So it's actually, I think, made it easier to cultivate these communities because you have this common enemy counterculture that all bands together and rallies together. So the polyamorous community, the kink communities, the leather communities, the drag communities, everything is all interconnected in a way that I've never really seen any other state do. In fact, I've talked to a lot of people who run other polyamorous communities in other states, and they say that there's almost like this like aggression towards each other in a way, this like competitiveness, and we don't really have that. So it's actually allowed us to make it easier to live within the confines of that community. Now, that said, there are clauses in jobs usually that they can fire you for unethical behavior. So you do have to be careful about being out to the wrong people. Mm-hmm. But that just really depends on who you are, what you do, your level of commitment to that, what you feel like you need, that sort of stuff.
Gotcha.
Oh.
So my second part of this question is our state has a lot of history rooted in polygamy due to the origin of the LDS Church. Part of the clause of Utah becoming a state is they had to disband beliefs in polygamy. And there's a very big negative connotation if you are raised in that state, especially given the affiliation with the FLDS off branches in the other state or other parts of the state. Do you think that adds to the animosity towards polyamory in Salt Lake? Is that kind of connotation?
I wouldn't say that it adds to the animosity. I think it adds to a little bit of misunderstanding for sure. People automatically go there when you try to talk about your relationship structure. I've had lots of people, like back in the day when there was that Sister Wives show on TV, I had people all the time be like, oh, like Sister Wives. And it's like, no, actually, no.
Definitely no.
But polyamory means multiple loves. It's actually kind of an umbrella term. So technically, polygamy is a subset of polyamory. Now, you hit the key on the head there, in that there's so much negative connotation within polygamy because of the FLDS Church. And I think that a lot of what we seek to do here in Utah is a lot of that education and outreach in regards to who we are, what we do, ways that it's different, because we describe ourselves as ethical non-monogamy, and I think the ethical is important because there's a lot of really big problems within the FLDS community and polygamy that make it so it's not ethical. And so we do have to do a lot of educating kind of the public masses on how we are different, how we're doing things different. And I think once people get that, they get that. And I don't really see any animosity towards us because of the FLDS religion, but I do see that confusion.
Okay, so now I think let's talk about your business and Amourology.net. What's it all about?
Yeah. So it's a platform for doing sex education, adult sex education mainly, and alternative lifestyle education such as polyamory and queer and trans, that sort of thing. What I do is I have cultivated this relationship with people in my community that do workshops, that do education, that do podcasts, that work as various different people within the sex and alternative lifestyles, and allow them to build upon that and give them a platform to actually present their material. And a large part of my involvement in that is building new material and presenting that material. So I do a lot of traveling. I go to different conferences. I present different workshops. I do that type of stuff. And then I also offer one-on-one coaching and mentoring for people with various different backgrounds for various different things. So.
When did you start polyamory.net? Or sorry, Amourology.net.
Amourology, yeah. So I started this endeavor not that long ago, probably about 9 months ago. I've been doing a lot of stuff with it before that. Building a lot of the workshops that I've built and presented were pre-Amourology days. And then I've just kind of built upon that and I guess made it an actual tangible thing that hopefully will eventually someday make me money at it. Right now it's more of just a service to the communities that I go to, and it's a passion project, right? I just enjoy it and I love it. But yeah, so about 9 months that's been going on pretty strong as far as the business end of it.
Cool. That's
Excellent.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. The workshops sound fascinating. I was obviously going through your website and like staring at the different things that you have posted. So like I don't even know how to like start this question. I want to know everything about the Harry Potter related workshop. Basically, I give me the commercial. Like if I was living in Utah right now, I would be your stalker and be at all of these events. But I think it's like a really interesting way of framing a conversation about polyamory. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah. So that one doesn't necessarily have to do with polyamory. It's for all relationship styles. Basically, there are personality styles that have been predetermined by various other different people who have done the research on that, and they've kind of developed them into these 4 quadrants. And there are, I don't know if you guys have read the book, The Love Languages. If not, I highly recommend it. But there's this idea of these love languages, and then a lot of people don't know that there's a counterpart to that called apology languages. What I have done is I have kind of combined all of these into one like solid thing that describes what I'm calling conflict languages. So it describes how people default to when they are in conflict, when they are feeling like they are in danger in some way, emotionally or whatever, and what they do, and then kind of what happens in the brain when that happens, when we go into that fight or flight mode, and what they need in order to get out of that scenario. And then I do it all in a framework of Harry Potter houses because I'm a nerd. So
I love it so much.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of your workshops are really just about like creating healthy communication or just spreading knowledge that really and it impacts all communities and all relationships, not just any specific branch. Yeah. I think that's the thing that I've found that I've respected the most out of the polyamorous people that I've met, is just the level of skill at communicating and, knowing what you need as a person and being able to tell your partners what you need, and then also knowing how to like ask the idea to ask like what do you need right now is something that I was just like really impressed by. It's this little simple move, but I feel like a lot of people just try to take care of people in the way that they would want to be taken care of, and I fall into that a lot.
Everybody is so different. I have a partner that when we fight, like I go into this like my emotions take over and I become totally unreasonable type person. And he goes into this like I'm going to retreat into myself and do all of my internal processing, and I'm such an external processor. And so what we need in those situations is totally, completely different. And in fact, is opposite of each other, because what he needs is for me to stop talking and give him the space and listen to him. And what I need is for him to talk more and like share with me what's happening. So it's so weird. Yeah. That is an interesting thought process that you brought up though, about polyamorous people kind of being self-aware like that and having that awareness. I think that's something that I find fascinating about polyamory, in that you can go, like when you're in monogamy land and you have this couple, you can go decades without addressing an issue. You can go a really long time by just burying it under the rug. And with polyamory, you can't do that. It bubbles everything up to the surface. So you learn real fast, real quickly how to deal with those emotions and how to talk about that stuff and how to address those issues before they become big.
To anyone stuck in monogamy land, I wouldn't advise going along that way. I think that's not great relationship advice.
Right. But it's a lot easier to do. And we see it all the time where people come in like as a couple into polyamory, they open themselves up and they invite more partners in, and it just bubbles all these things up to the surface. And sometimes the relationship can deal with those things and come out much stronger on the other end, and sometimes they can't and they end up parting ways. But it really does, it's really amazing to see that this idea over and over again when people open themselves up, how much stuff they buried down deep.
You just looked at me. Are you going to kill me?
Oh, no. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about follow-up questions.
Rage inside you is bubbling out.
No, there's definitely a lot that we tried to learn from the Ethical Slut about conflict resolution and good communication. So what I'm noticing is that communication is the through line there. If you want to live a polyamorous lifestyle, then you have to learn how to be a good communicator. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like successful poly people are, like you said, learn quickly how to communicate and embrace that conflict in a healthy way. Yeah, that's just absolutely. So blows my mind.
When people talk about how to make polyamory work, everybody's go-to thing is communication. Mm-hmm. I actually like to take it a step further, though. I feel like self-awareness is the most important thing, because you can't communicate if you don't know what you're communicating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's something that the Ethical Slut talked about a lot, is just like learning who you are, what your needs are, what your tendencies are, how you communicate. Mm-hmm. And I have never been good at that. So it's just I love hearing and learning everything about this, because I'm like, this is something I need to apply to my life. So tell me how it works for you being in a household and also having kids. I feel like you're dealing with the same stressors that a lot of monogamous couples have, right? Like you have a lot going on, and I just wonder, like, are there ways that you found to better communicate any conflict resolution? Would you say that everybody in the house is co-parenting, or is it more of like it's almost like you're an aunt or an uncle? Like how does that relationship work for you?
Yeah, for me, I'd say it's more of like an aunt or an uncle relationship. The kids were older by the time that we kind of came into their lives. So Grant and Terry have 3 children, and actually they were all 3 living with us when we first moved into this house. The oldest has since moved out. But the ones that are left are 17 and 19. Oh, wow. Now we've lived in this house for almost 4 years now. So they were, the youngest was preteen type stuff when we moved in. And I think the youngest was about 8 years old when her parents started down the polyamory pathway. So she's kind of really grown up with it. But at the same time, we weren't in that like crucial early stages of their development wherein they view us as like other parental figures.
Sure.
Now, given that, I think that there are, we do a lot of co-parenting. We divide up responsibilities. We can have conversations with the children about various different topics. And I think they feel comfortable coming to us if they have an issue or they need something resolved, or things that they can't talk to their parents about, like sex questions or various other different topics. Like, we can be that alternate resource for them.
I would say that I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this question, because I do believe that having multiple adults in a teenager or a child's development is very important and a good thing. I mean, I looked to my step parents as other parental figures growing up, it's impossible to describe him because he was never legally my stepfather, but the gentleman who my mom was dating throughout all of my teenagedom, I do see as a father figure coming in. So I feel like I'm a better person for that. So I do agree that having multiple adults on a child's life is a positive impact, but were there any negative implications?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to it, I think, particularly when you're dealing with things like parents who are really sex positive, because that's weird, right? It's super weird, particularly in Utah. So our youngest, when she was younger, she was the one that she was like, I just want to be normal. I just want to be normal. I don't want to invite people over to the house because I don't want to have to explain to them what's going on because they're going to think I'm weird. And so there were some negative repercussions that happened because of that, for sure. But I also think that again, on the other side, like we're showing them and her that there are different ways of being, and she gets to decide that for herself. And she doesn't have to think inside the box, and she is allowed to think critically about all of her relationships and what healthy relationships look like to her, and all of that stuff. I think that there was a lot of, like, when we first moved into the house and we knew this was going to be an issue, there was a lot of turmoil around the idea of sex. Like, are my parents having sex? Can I hear them having sex? Like that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's weird for a young person. So there was a lot of compromising that had to happen over that. But again, there's good things about that too, right? We're teaching them about sex positivity. We are teaching them that it's normal. We are also teaching them to compromise. There's so many good things that can come out of that. So yeah, there's pros and cons to it for sure. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for everyone. I talk about this in one of my workshops where I talk about cohabitation, the Fools Russian workshop, wherein there are legal implications to having children in a polyamorous household too, and that can be problematic for some people as well. So it's things to keep in account for that.
It's got to be complicated with them also reaching a sexual maturity age and being in the household, and how, I just assume that would be very complicated if they wanted to start. Is there any scenario where people that they were raised with that were adults would enter their lives, like, once they reach adulthood? Like, I guess that's like the concern that a conservative person might take, right? Is like, if they grow up in this household and they've had these parental figures, what happens if one of those parental figures were to target them and want to be a partner with them, like that kind of thing?
Yeah, that would definitely not be okay. That would be a boundary.
Exactly. Like, so I think that this is all stuff that you guys would obviously talk about and set boundaries for. And I just wanted to like flag that terrible thought, because I feel like that's something, that's a rabbit hole that somebody listening might think would happen in these scenarios.
Well, I mean, you get that with monogamous relationships too, right? There's all sorts of scenarios where somebody starts dating somebody and they end up molesting the child, or they end up, like, there are so many dangerous situations, and I think it's just a people thing. Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely a concern. You definitely don't want to. I mean, I would, if somebody in my circle started dating one of my children, like that would definitely be inappropriate.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I wouldn't want that person around anymore.
Sure.
That would be a boundary.
Something that the book talked about is
The book,
the Ethical Slut book, talked about is in a tight-knit community such as polyamory, if someone is being unethical, that reputation gets circulated around fairly quickly. So if someone was doing that, would it be easy to flag to others what's happening, or?
It can be. I think that it's tricky because people who have a pattern of behavior with problematic things tend to be really good at convincing people that their behavior isn't problematic, and tend to be really good at cultivating that kind of veil of secrecy. So yes, if somebody does something wrong, it can get circulated quickly, but also it can also be really hard to talk about that type of stuff. So my first relationship that I talked about earlier, that kind of ended in flames, was one of those scenarios where we found out that he was being extremely unethical about what he was doing. There was all sorts of non-consensual sexual relationships happening, and this kind of turned into what I call the broken stair scenario. So like everybody kind of goes up that stair and everybody's like, oh, we need to fix that broken stair, but nobody ever does. Nobody ever talks about it. Nobody wants to be in charge of fixing that broken stair. And he was really, really good at cultivating this veil of secrecy because everybody was supposed to trust him and not be talking to each other about what was happening. So I think something that I've worked really hard in my community to rectify is this idea of consent and what does consent look like. And that doesn't look like you just trust that person. And you have to be careful about spreading rumors, yes, but also there is this idea that, like, why would I talk to my metamors about this to my partner? And so it's really easy to miss some of that problematic behavior because it's usually a pattern, and they're usually really good at curating this area around them that isn't going to talk about it.
Huh. So how do you deal with someone who is like crossing boundaries that it was agreed that they shouldn't cross, or violating the ethical part of ethical non-monogamy? Does anybody ever get excommunicated, or how do you deal with with people who are bad apples, essentially?
I mean, sure, yeah. I can say that, like, this particular person is still in the community in some form. My group, my bubble, doesn't interact with him at all. He doesn't get invited to our house. He doesn't get invited to any of our stuff. Like, I want nothing to do with him, and so do a lot of the people. When I kind of came out about this story and recognized, because I was being vocal about it, more people were coming to me with their stuff. It did create a rift in the community wherein there was like people that wanted to ignore it, and it was easier than the conflict of it, and then the people that wanted to do something about it and kind of rally against, and that just kind of created two separate communities in a way. Okay. So yes, people can get excommunicated, so to speak, from the community. There's always going to be other communities. There's always going to be friends, and nor like should you really expect them to like not go away and not have anybody that's a support system, right? Like, they're human beings and they're people, and they may have made bad choices, but that doesn't mean that they deserve to lose everything. And so it's a tricky business. Like, we as like the official Utah Polyamory Society, we only ban people. We can't ban anybody from events. We host public events. But we can, like, if somebody's safety is threatened, we can call the police, for instance. But on the online forum, we usually ban people if, like, there is a legal ramifications, like if there's a restraining order, someone was convicted of a sexual assault, wherein the safety of somebody in our community is going to be affected, we can ban them from that. But in the end, like, they're still going to have their community, and that's okay, too.
Yeah, right. Like you said, there's still people. They may have made bad choices, but...
Yeah. There's something going on right now, actually, in the kind of higher polyamory, what would you call it, I guess? There's a select group of people who are, like, celebrities in the polyamory community. Franklin Vo and Eve Ricker are two of those people who, just like everybody in the polyamory community, knows who they are. They've written quite a few books on polyamory. They travel around and do workshops, that sort of stuff. It just came out that Franklin Vo was basically curating these relationships that were abusive. And so it's like, how do you, particularly when someone's a celebrity, how do you fight for justice without completely tarnishing their reputation and not giving them a chance to rectify that? So if you're interested, just look up some of that stuff. It's really fascinating what they're doing with that. They have what they call like a survivor pod, wherein there's like people around all of the victims of this that are like legal in media and connected to it, but not actually like involved in it. And I like what they do because they bring it all to them. Like, it's not about him. It's not about what he did. It's about, what can I do moving forward to make sure that this doesn't happen in my community? What can I do to make sure that I don't fall into this trap again? What can I do to ensure that people are being educated about this? And that's what it's about. It's about us and not them.
What are some of the misconceptions that you face regularly from people that don't necessarily know what the lifestyle is all about, because I feel like a lot of people probably think like the negative idea of sluthood or not being committed, like those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, the biggest one that I think most people get is, so you're polyamorous, that means you're just going to sleep with everyone, right? And that's not the case. I've definitely had people like get mad at me for not wanting to sleep with them because I don't want to sleep with them, and they're like, but you're polyamorous. So it's like, that doesn't mean anything. And I think that there is this like preconceived notion that it's like a lack of commitment. People just want to sleep around, that sort of stuff. But I mean, yeah, look at what I have. Like, I've been with one partner 8 years, another partner 5 years. We live together, we cohabitate, we share finances. Like, it's definitely, I think it's, you make it what you want. And there's nothing wrong with just sleeping around too. I've definitely had relationships where I've been like, hey, I really like you for sex, but not for this romantic stuff. Like, that's cool. Let's do that for a while. And I think we do a really good job in our community of like educating people on like what happens about slut shaming and stuff like that, and sex positivity and all that good stuff. But I think the big difference in polyamory is that people are oftentimes looking for romantic relationships rather than just sexual relationships usually. Yeah. So that's the biggest probably preconceived idea that we get.
Everyone's human. Everyone wants to be loved.
That is true.
Yeah.
Cycling back to Amourology.net, the one-on-one counseling, like what? Tell me more. Like, are you working with couples? Like, what does that shape? What is that?
Yeah. So I can do both. I can do one-on-one or with couples. I usually charge on a sliding scale based on people's needs and desires. Basically, what it looks like is, I do two things. I do coaching and I do mentoring, and I think that they're very different. So mentoring is a little bit more of like, I have this knowledge and I would like to share that knowledge with you, and I'm going to tell you based on my knowledge and what you're doing, what I think the best route for you to take is. And then there's coaching, which is like, I'm going to listen to where you're at and I'm going to help you do that inward searching and do that self-development to kind of decide where you want to go from here and what that path looks like for you. So I do a little bit of both, and I like it, there's a distinction between the two, and I try to make that distinction pretty clear too. But I've worked with single people, I've worked with couples, I've worked with people who are polyamorous, I've worked with people who are not polyamorous. Like, and I've worked with people that like it's not even about relationships really. Like, they just want to get their life in an order that they can function again. Like. That's totally fine too. So I do kind of a wide range of stuff.
When you say counseling, what is your background? Do you have a therapy degree or training for that?
No. So coaching is the word that I used. So it's different. I do have I've gone through training like for coaching and stuff like that, but I don't have a therapy background, so it's not counseling or therapy. And I like that's definitely a big distinction that I make for people too. And I always recommend that people go to therapy while they're coming to me as well. And they get their therapist's permission to do that and make sure that it's a good kind of fit for everyone involved too. I'm a huge advocate of therapy, but it's not a service I offer.
Okay.
Awesome.
That's an important distinction to make.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Krista, can you do us a favor and spell out your website? Because if you try Googling you or Amourology, it will take you to a wedding planning website, or at least for us it does in San Diego.
Yeah, you might be, it's AMOUR OLOGY, and if you just search that, you should get it up.
Amourology.
For anyone who wants to check out the website.
We'll have the link in the show.
Yeah, Amourology.net.
We'll have the link in the show notes.
So You can subscribe. I send out like newsletters and things that I'm doing. My web modules is a little bit broken right now. It's not working for phone. That's trying to be fixed. I'm not a programmer, so bear with me on that. But you can see my workshops, where my next events are. I have some events coming up at like Burning Man and Portland coming up shortly after that. So if you want to check that out, then feel free. And you can always contact me through my website and ask for services or ask for a workshop or anything like that too. So
that sounds great.
Shameless plug there.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, that's one of the, well, you've been such a great guest. I think you get to plug.
Are there any things that you want people to know about polyamory, just about the lifestyle or the human beings that like maybe they wouldn't know at first glance? I feel like we've covered a lot, but
it's really difficult. I want people to like, some people, I mean, I feel like I am kind of naturally polyamorous. There are people who make this lifestyle choice as a choice. And I think whatever the case is, like, there are these preconceived notions that society puts on us that tells us things growing up, and like everybody has them because that's a society we live in. And until you start tearing down those preconceived notions, I think you don't realize how many you hold. And so I would just caution anybody going into trying out polyamory that, like, if this is something you want to try out, please absolutely do so, but just be aware that you're going to run into hurdles and brick walls, and it's going to be hard, and you're going to continue to gain the tools to get over those and to work on that and keep it up, because I think it's worth it if this is something that you're interested in.
Yeah, it is hard. And we mentioned on our last episode that Megan and I briefly tried having an open relationship, and that experiment crashed and burned because we went about it in the wrong way. We didn't do.
I think the reason it crashed and burned is honestly we were using it as a
right.
It was a solution for another problem. That wasn't the right solution.
Yeah, that wasn't the right solution. Neither
Colin and I are naturally.
At the end of the day, I think we're both monogamists.
Yeah, we tried.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think I see that a lot where people come in trying to fix a relationship or fix a problem of some sort, and that I highly recommend not doing that. I'd say work on your relationship, decide what you want to do, and then maybe decide to open it up for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think the upside of the fact that we tried it and it didn't work was, I mean, the reason we tried it was because long distance, and I think the positive thing that came out of it was it ended the long distance.
It did. We
So you figured something out of it. That's awesome.
Yeah, we did. I think we came out stronger for sure.
Yeah.
That's great.
I have a question. You've talked a little bit about kind of some of the legal problems that might happen, especially with kids growing up in the house, or when you're sharing kind of finances. What legal are there good legal resources for people in polyamory?
There are. So a lot of the I'm not a lawyer, first of all. So a lot of the like legal research that I've done is about cohabitation. So I don't know a ton about like just random legality stuff, but because I do presentations on cohabitation, I've done research on it. Particularly if somebody's thinking about cohabitating with anybody, just not even like a romantic partner, just anybody. There's two different ways that you can, there's multiple ways that you can go about it. My favorite way is called a tenancy in common. And I would just recommend talking to a lawyer about it. If you just Google tenancy in common or TIC in your local area, you'll find lawyers that specialize in it. But that would be the resources that I would say to go towards. As far as like children and stuff, I think any lawyer could be a resource, but I think the biggest thing is just education on what could go wrong, because like polyamorous people tend to lose custody battles a lot, for instance. So that's something to just be aware of. And particularly if you're cohabitating with other people, it can be, you can potentially lose your children if you piss off the wrong person, I guess. And they kind of bring that out. Now, a lot of people can get their children back by like separating for a time period, making it look like they live in this normal household, and then rejoining at a later time. But it's just something to be aware of. There's also like, if you're cohabitating with people, you're legally, like, your job can fire you potentially too. A lot of jobs have morality clauses written into their contracts. So it just things to be aware of for sure.
I think this is an obvious question, but I would love to hear you speak on it. Why do you think people find polyamorous people incapable of being good parents, and why do you think they're wrong?
Yeah, I don't think that's an obvious question at all. In fact, I don't think I've ever gotten asked that question. That's fascinating. I think that there is this fear of anything that's promiscuous, anything that's outside of the norm. And we're taught from a very early age to grow up in this society that is normal. So I think whenever you have children in these households that are not normal, people think that there has to be something wrong with it. There has to be something that is affecting these children in a negative way. And a lot of that has to do with like promiscuity between adults, that sort of thing. But some of it is simply just that it's different. It's strange. It's weird. Now, I definitely think that they're wrong. I think that like there's a reason that they're just saying it takes a village, right? And it definitely takes a village to raise a child. And I think that the more solid, parental figures that you have in a household, the more people, young people especially, can take all of those different ideas of how to be a functioning adult and form themselves into a whole person a lot sooner than they do when they leave home for the first time when they're 18 and they have to do all of that growing in a couple of years by themselves. Right. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, some of the problems that way back ago while we were recording, you were saying are concerns with having kids in a polyamorous household. I think those are concerns with kids in any household. I think there's concerns of parents don't stop having sex after a kid is born, not even monogamous parents. So I'm sure there's a great fear of being like, I wonder if they can hear. And for those who are unfortunate to have done that, it's the worst.
Yeah. And as a sex educator, like I think that's super problematic in general, because we teach our kids, by doing that, by hiding it, we teach our kids that this is not okay behavior.
It's bad, right?
And so people grow up with this idea that sex is bad, and they don't even know where they got that. And then they have to tear down all of those emotions before they can then be functioning sexual beings. And so, I mean, I would urge people in general just to be more open with their kids about sex and compromise about it. And it's going to be weird, but it's also teaching them that it's okay and it's normal.
Mm-hmm. I mean, my parents were super open about sex. Like, I think there's a balance. Like, they were open and they taught me, and it led me to be normal, but I have happily never overheard my father during sex.
And it would be weird, right? So like there are compromises I think you have to make in that while still being sex positive. Like one of the things that we do is, like, since we live with two teenagers, right, we have just a condom drawer that's out in the family room that nobody pays attention to. So if they decide, and we've done that education, if they decide they want to become sexually active, like they have that protection available, and nobody's going to ask any questions. Nobody's tracking that sort of stuff. So it's like a way to be sex positive without enforcing that on your children, I guess. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Absolutely. Even in the concept of like not wanting to hear your parents have sex, I feel like it's just a very easy thing of saying, you know, it's a private thing between the consenting partners. And of course, it's like weird to hear them, but like trying to reframe it so it's not like, I don't want you to hear us having sex because sex is bad. I don't want you to hear us having sex because it's private. It's a private thing that I'm sharing with these partners that I've chosen to share it with.
Or you've expressed that you don't like that, so we're going to make an effort to help you be a more comfortable member of this household.
Absolutely,
because you're a person.
Yeah.
So yeah, but there's also things like we can like, that doesn't mean we're going to stop having sex or that we're going to stop making these noises, but maybe like we can let you know ahead of time so you can put in headphones, or you can go for a walk, or we're not going to do it when you have friends over, that sort of stuff too.
Yeah, again, having that healthy communication and compromises.
Right.
I guess the reason that I said that my question was obvious, and that it's obvious that polyamorous people would be just equally as good parents as anybody else in the world because we're people, is because I think everyone's, my opinion, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my opinion is that everybody's looking at your relationships with the context of negative monogamous relationship issues with non-consensual relationships where you're seeing people with like affairs or people. I think the other concern is the idea of constantly bringing in boyfriends, and what if those boyfriends end up being predatory, or girlfriends predatory towards the children and that kind of thing. But in a polyamorous relationship, you have people that you're like, I feel like polyamorous people are just better at communication. Like, I'm putting it out there. I think they're better communicators than monogamous. Roast me. I don't care.
But I think there's also like, you have more, you're bringing more people in, so there's more risk of predatory behavior, I suppose. But there's also way more people looking out for those people too, for the children. And like, particularly people with small children. I mean, how many people do you know that have had small children that are monogamous that just get burnt out, that they cannot take their children anymore? They've worked so hard, they just get tired. I think that's one of the things about polyamorous households too, is you get tired, or you get burnt out, or you get emotional, you can just kick it sideways and somebody else can take the kid for a while, and you have so many people to do that. And so it makes, I think, people just better parents in general, actually, because they have more energy to put towards that.
They have more support.
Yeah,
I guess that's what I really wanted to get to, is like, I want, if there are any listeners who are very like curious, or maybe like unsure, or have negative sentiment towards the idea of polyamory, I really want to make sure that you're reframing your thought, not based on the negative things that you've seen in monogamous relationships that have affairs, or people who are bringing in a lot of partners and not taking the child's needs and health and safety into consideration. That's a very different thing than what a polyamorous couple is. And I'm sure that there are people, we're all human, we all make mistakes, so I'm sure that there might be some polyamorous people who might be bad at like taking those considerations in, just as there are monogamous people who are bad and don't take those considerations in. But I just want to make sure that people are aware that you have these talks, you have these conversations with your partners, and it's not the same as the negative stuff that you've seen in a different society. I don't know. Yeah,
and I think that's really the basis of polyamory. I mean, that's why we call it, like, I usually, when I describe to people, I say consensual, ethical, non-monogamy, because an ethical is subjective, right? So there's all sorts of debates that you can have on what is ethical, what's not. But the consensual part is a big part of that too, like the consent of everyone involved. Everybody is involved. Everyone's empowered to make their own decisions with regards to that, and that's okay, and that's safe to do so.
I mean, man, on that note, I just thank you so much for coming onto this podcast. Like, I've loved talking to you. You've been such a great learned guest. So much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Again, shouting out everybody, please check out Amourology.net. Again, we'll link it. The workshops look absolutely amazing. Even for some, like you said, you're a sex educator. I am fascinated by your workshop on the vulva, and You know, we're talking eventually about doing a masturbation episode. Obviously, I think that's something
like
that we
a
need to do.
For sure.
Yeah, self-pleasure, and I just kudos to you. I think it's I want to go. So if you're in Utah specifically, or if you're going to Burning Man, like everybody, look up this website. There are so many amazing resources that she has provided. Yeah. Do you have an Instagram, Facebook?
I do. So yeah, you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Amourology Ed. So like education, but Amourology Ed.
I'm Megan.
I'm Marcella.
I'm Colin.
And I'm Krista.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
Contribute to
Bye,
the wearing of a mature person.
An absence of
Oh, yeah, you don't have to be thinking about it.